do here? How do I start? How? You can't peek in on me like that because then I get nervous and I'm gonna quit. This is a story all about how my life got. I'm just warming up. I'm gonna get there. Just let me do my process. So for the last 2 years, we have ran a home bakery making all vegan treats in the Treasure Valley. That's in Boise, Idaho. And during that time, it's always kind of just been a hobby and a way to make friends. But we have the hopes to begin traveling full time. And so part of that is closing our bakery. And we wanted to make sure that the recipes that I've worked really hard to perfect and create and that our friends and community love so much will be available to whoever needs them or wants them. And one of our cult followings is our conchas.
To make the base of our conchas, you'll need a yeast dough. So to make the yeast rise, you mix hot water with milk and then check the temperature of it, because too hot will scald your yeast and it won't work, and too cold won't let it bloom. So you want it to be right around 105 to 115 degrees for your yeast to activate. Then in your mixing bowl, you'll combine a little bit of sugar and your yeast so that the yeast has something to eat while it blooms. So in this video, I am doubling the recipe, and I used about a tablespoon of sugar to bloom the yeast. If you're not doubling the recipe, you can use just a teaspoon of sugar to bloom your yeast. You add your milk and water into your mixing bowl with the yeast and a little bit of sugar, and then let it sit for about 5 minutes. As long as it's frothy and bubbly, you'll know that your yeast is good and active and you're good to go. We use Earth Balance. You could use any vegan butter or margarine for this. It's just what we happen to use today. You're going to want the vegan butter to be softened slightly, so you can microwave it for 15 seconds at a time until it's soft but not melted. You're going to reserve the liquid from a can of chickpeas. I usually put the leftover chickpeas in a glass jar and refill it with water to be used sometime later this week for a recipe with chickpeas. I've always heard that you shouldn't add salt to your yeast when it's blooming because it can kill the yeast. So I always add anything that has salt in it at the very last step. So you'll combine half your flour, sugar, aquafaba, salt, and butter. Once that's roughly combined, then add the remainder of your flour. Combine it just slightly to help the dough ball start before we add the full amount of flour. I don't know why this works, it just does. Anytime I've tried to just put all of the ingredients in at one time, the ball doesn't combine as nicely as when I leave off the second half of flour. If you don't have a stand mixer, you can do this in a mixing bowl. It'll just require you to knead it by hand rather than by hook, but it's no problem. And that's it for the base of the concha dough. You're going to mix this until it forms a ball or hand knead it. The process of kneading it can take a few minutes. Once you have an elastic dough ball, which means if you push down into it, the dimple pops back up, then you know you're done. You'll transfer it to an oiled bowl, something that it can rise in, and it's going to get covered and set aside for about 2 hours in a warm place. If you have a very cold kitchen, you can turn on the oven light in your oven and place it in there while it rises. And then I usually will write what time I put the dough ball in to rise, I'll write that down on the plastic wrap covering the bowl. That way I don't forget how long it's been rising. But you'll want it to about double in size. To make the topping for our conchas, I like to use the Crisco butter style baking sticks or margarine. These are an accidentally vegan ingredient. I found that this is much more stable of a margarine or butter to work with rather than some of the stick butters that at room temperature are a little wetter and a little harder to work with. So you'll mix your margarine with powdered sugar, flour, and vanilla extract. I use a spatula and a fork, and then eventually just get into it with my hands. If you're combining it and it feels a little too dry and crumbly and it's not sticking together, you can add a bit more margarine. And if it's too sticky that it's not coming away from the bowl or staying to your hands, then you can add a little more flour until it creates like a Play-Doh like consistency, something that you can mold and mash and stays together. I use gloves a lot in these videos because most of these recipes are still going to customers for orders. And so as we run a home bakery, I take extra precautions when touching food to make sure that we're staying as clean as possible. There's also a part of it where texturally, I really don't enjoy touching butter. So if you're having a hard time making foods because of textures, while it's not great to have single-use items, sometimes gloves really can make the difference and help you enjoy being in the kitchen more. Once you have a dough ball formed, you can split it up and color it however you'd like. And that's where the fun, artsy part of making conchas is what color you choose to make your topping. I encourage you to really have fun with the coloring and topping. You can also add things like cocoa powder or different flavors like orange zest or lemon extract. You can really play with the topping and make it your own. The bread portion or the bun portion of the concha is just soft and pillowy. It does not have a lot of flavor, and so all of the flavor and sweetness lies in the topping. So that's your space to be creative and have as much fun with it as you'd like. You can also make your topping in multiple different colors and then combine the colors right before you place them on top of your concha ball, making rainbows or tie-dye effect. There's so much fun you can have with the topping. Don't feel like you have to do the classic pink and white.
Veganizing things like conchas is super important to me, and then it's easy to see when the community loves them the way that they do that we're not the only ones that want these things.
Once your dough is ready, you can start separating out your topping. One batch of our concha recipe makes 16 conchas, so you can either weigh it or you can just eyeball breaking your topping and your dough into 16 balls. Again, in this recipe, I've doubled it, so I will have 32. This recipe is really easy to double, triple, quadruple. We've done that. It's easy in that it works. It is not easy in that you have to roll out that many dough balls, and I recommend you try a single batch of this recipe first and see how the process goes before you double or triple it, because you're kind of racing the clock with the yeast in your dough. You don't want it to get overproofed or underproofed, and so it can be a little tricky when you're working with yeasted dough. Getting your conchas assembled is going to be the trickiest part of the whole recipe, but once you get the hang of it, it will move really quickly. So you're going to pinch the ball in on itself and roll it around on your surface or on your hand until you get a tight little ball of dough, and then place it on your parchment-lined baking sheet while you get the rest into balls. I usually do this about 12 at a time. or a tray at a time is how I will work and keep the rest of the dough covered so that it doesn't dry out. During this part, you'll need a little cup or bowl of water, and I have a little extra flour for my hands. You want to flatten your topping to about the same size as the top of your concha. Then you'll add a bit of water on top of your dough and then cover it with the concha topping. I then use a pizza cutter as a way to make the shell lattice work on top. They do make special concha stamps where you can have beautiful roses or the concha shell design, but I have been doing this now as a bakery for 2 years, and I just love the way that I have control over the pizza cutter, and it always turns out really cute. I've also seen lots of other recipes while I was researching this recipe and trying out different ways of making conchas, that there were people who suggested you roll out the topping and then place on top. But I really struggle with, once it's flat on the board, being able to get it up without ripping it. That's why I like to mold the topping in my hand, because it's already where I need it to be before I add it to the dough ball, and I have less breakage that way. But do whatever works best for you. Once your conchas are assembled, you'll want to cover them again and let them proof one last time, about 15 minutes in a warm place before they go into the oven to bake. You're gonna want to watch these the first time you bake them and check your oven. Everyone's oven is a little bit different. In my oven, we preheat to 350 and it takes just about 12 minutes. The way you'll know that it's done is if you check the bottom of it and it's nice and golden brown.
I really hope that me putting these recipes out there and really stepping out of my comfort zone in order to do that leads to more people eating vegan food, and also trying some things and realizing that maybe it's not as hard as it seems or as we've told ourselves it will be. Because I know at the beginning of our vegan journey, it definitely felt daunting, and it felt like we were never going to eat normal food ever again. And I don't feel that way now. I feel like it's never been easier to be vegan, and I'm really excited to start traveling and trying food all over the country and seeing what awesome stuff other vegan chefs are creating. And hopefully we can share those with you as well. So bear with us, because this is a learning process, and being in front of the camera is not something I'm feeling particularly ready to do. I'm feeling very nervous about all of this, but I want to empower more people to get into the kitchen and try some stuff.
I think all that's left to do is add your favorite warm beverage.